All right. Thank you all for coming out. I'd also like to thank Lorraine and the Library System for sponsoring these events. I think the Library System does a great job with their programming in general, but I'm especially appreciative of having an opportunity to do these presentations for you. We are going to be talking tonight a bit about online security, specifically around privacy and how to avoid online manipulation. And before we get started, I need a volunteer. I'm looking at this table over here. So I'm wondering if you guys would help me out. I have a little bit of an exercise that I would like to do. It's nothing too, are you guys okay to do this? All right. So what I'd like you to do is to read that statement out loud so everyone, I'm sorry, what's your name? Bruce. Bruce. Bruce, I'd like you to read that statement out loud so that everyone can hear it, and then we'll take it from there, okay?
Okay. This agreement is between me and you. As long as I am here, I agree to let you store the data I provide in a lockbox. You agree that you won't take it out unless compelled to do so by law enforcement.
Okay, great. So understand that makes sense? Okay, so if you're okay with that, I'd like you to write your name, phone number, and mother's maiden name on that sheet of paper. I don't know, we'll see. So if you could just write that on there for me. So I'll only take a second. I feel like we should have some Jeopardy music or something while he's doing this. No pressure. We really should have some music while we're doing this. All right, great. So don't show it to anybody. I'm gonna fold that up and I'm gonna take it. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put it in this lockbox. I'm gonna put it in here. I'm gonna lock it, and then I'm gonna give Graham the key.
All right.
All right, we'll come back to that in a little bit. All right, so now that that's out of the way, does everybody know who this guy is? Mickey Mouse. Yeah, everybody knows who Mickey Mouse is. Well, how many of you have heard about this story? It's a really tragic story. There was a couple who was visiting Disney Springs, and the wife died from an allergic reaction to something that she ate there. And the husband is now trying to sue Disney for a wrongful death. People heard of this? A few people? Okay, this is a true story. It's very tragic, but it gets more bizarre because Disney, or at least Disney's lawyers, are claiming that he cannot sue them because he has a Disney Plus subscription. And in the Disney Plus agreement, the usage agreement, it says that any disputes will be handled through binding arbitration and not lawsuits. All right? So, I mean, M-I-C-K-E-Y. Why, Mickey? Why? Why are you doing this? If Mickey Mouse is pulling out an arbitration clause, you know there's something seriously wrong with the world, right? But the good news is that there was a huge backlash, and Disney backed off of this. But what they were talking about was this clause in this agreement that basically says that any disputes between this man and Disney has to go to binding arbitration, and he can't sue them. Now, they backed off of this, luckily, because there was such a media uproar. But my question is, what if they hadn't? What if this had gone to court? Who would have prevailed? Would Disney have basically prevented this man from suing them because he had a Disney Plus agreement? And the crazy thing is that I'm guessing that this couple probably didn't even know this agreement existed, much less what it said. So it's unfortunate that they backed off of it. But now what I want to do is come back over here to Bruce. So Bruce, if you could read this out loud, please, I would appreciate it.
Okay. Haec conventio inter me et te est, dum hic sum consentio.
Actually, don't worry about it. It's okay. This is really hard to read, but are you okay if we just proceed without you reading this?
Yeah, I'll sign anything right now.
Okay, great. So Bruce says it's fine. So can I have that key? All right, thanks, sir. So what Bruce just agreed to was this. And what this says is essentially that now I can use his data to entertain him or to share it with any relevant partners. And because I get to decide who the relevant partners are, I'm going to decide to sell his information to anybody in the room who'll give me $1. So you can have his name, his phone number, and his mother's maiden name for $1. Anyone? Anyone? All right. So obviously I'm kidding. I'm going to give you your data back because I don't want to be responsible for it anymore. But this happens every single day. We all use online platforms that we have no idea what the user agreements say because we generally don't read them. And then those platforms change them arbitrarily based on whatever they decide they need or want at that particular moment in time. They're very one-sided agreements, and we generally don't read them. And what people don't always realize is that simply by using the platform, just like Bruce decided to stay in the room, just by continuing to use the platforms, we are agreeing to the terms of those agreements. So going back to what Disney tried to do, I don't know if they would have prevailed, but these things happen every single day. And I'm guessing that most of us don't read these agreements. I mean, I don't read most of them. I mean, I think everyone in the room probably has some platform that they use. I mean, how many, show of hands, how many people in the room have ever read a Disney Plus agreement? Or a ChatGPT agreement? Or Facebook? You don't count. Or Apple or Google or any of these agreements, right? Don't feel bad. I haven't read them either, right? And I pay a lot of attention to this stuff, but I don't read them either because the one that Bruce was trying to read was actually this bottom part translated into Latin. And for all their readability, these agreements probably should be in Latin because the average reading level in the United States is about an 8th grade reading level. All of these agreements are considerably more advanced than that, just in terms of the words that are in them. They're full of legal jargon. They're full of all kinds of things. And some of these platforms even split their usage agreements across multiple pages. So it's not even like you can download it and read it. It was really challenging to actually figure out how readable they were because they split them across multiple pages. And so we don't always understand what we're signing up for. So that's our first lesson tonight, is that we have to be very intentional about who we give our information to and who we work with. You know, we sort of give these platforms the benefit of the doubt, thinking that they're going to do the right thing. And I think the big players generally have the right intentions. But if push comes to shove, they're going to use our data to benefit them and not necessarily us. Where I see a real concern is that there's a proliferation of new platforms, new websites. You know, we hear a lot about AI, and every single platform out there is now having an AI component to it. And to use these platforms, you have to essentially agree to the terms of usage. And so if you don't know what you're signing up for, that's a very real challenge. So one of the big things that I want you to be aware of is that when you're picking these platforms to use, do some due diligence, do some research on them. Don't just sign up because it looks interesting or looks good. Ask your friends. One of my favorite things to do is to go online and say, is platform ABC legitimate? What will platform ABC do with my data? And it's not perfect. You can't really know everything that they're doing. You can't find out everything about them. But to me, what it does is it slows you down a little bit. It makes you be a bit more intentional about how you sign up for these platforms. You know, one of my annoyances these days is that in order to do anything online, you have to create an account, right? You have to give them at least your email address and a password, and it's just kind of annoying. So just be very intentional about that. Think about that before you're signing up. Now, once you kind of think about who you're doing business with, there's actually two other concepts that we want to talk about. One is privacy, and the other is manipulation. Privacy is your ability to keep your data out of the hands of people that you don't want to have it. And in the United States, we sort of accept that as a right that we all have. It's not true around the world, but in the United States, we sort of expect that we have a right to privacy. But your ability to protect your privacy is only as good as your ability to actually guard your data. As soon as someone has your data and can do something with it, you've essentially lost your ability to control your privacy. One of the things that we all need to think about is how much do we value privacy? So there's a spectrum here, and on the left are people who are very, very close guarded with their information. These are people who basically want to stuff all of their information under the mattress. They want to hide under the bed, and they would rather do anything than share anything with anybody. At the other extreme are people who stand on a hilltop and shout everything that they do and everything that they have. I met a CEO a few weeks ago who is the CEO of a pretty up-and-coming online educational platform. And he has a medical condition that he's dealing with. It's not, I don't think it's a life-threatening medical condition, but it's a serious medical condition. He has uploaded his entire medical history into one of the AI platforms. And his reasoning for this was that nobody cares about his information. So if somebody got it, so what? They wouldn't, there's nothing they could do with it. And he's very open about this condition, so he doesn't care if people know about it. And his concept is that I want the ability to have the AI platform help me do reasoning and to help me figure out my course of medical action. It's perfectly, well, I don't want to say it's a perfectly reasonable stance to take, but it's an understandable stance, right? You want this intelligence to help you figure out how you're going to deal with your medical situation. But he's decided that that piece of information, that set of information is not precious enough to him that he's going to keep it out of these platforms. Most of us are somewhere on this spectrum, right? Depending on the context, depending on the data. A lot of you who have Facebook probably don't think twice about uploading family vacation photos to Facebook, but you probably wouldn't post them on a public forum. You probably wouldn't post your social security number on Facebook for everyone to see it, right? You might post that you got a new job, but you're probably not going to post your salary. So there's a spectrum of information, both from a contextual standpoint as well as from an audience standpoint, that we all have to think about. And we have to think about it in terms of what we're willing to share and what we're not willing to share. So once you kind of understand what your tolerance is, what do we do from a privacy standpoint? There are a few things that we can do. One is don't share more than you need to. When you go to sign up for a platform or when you're given a form, there's usually a bunch of fields that have a little red star beside them. Right? Those are the required fields. What I do is I fill out the required fields and I leave everything else blank. There needs to be a compelling reason for me to share more information than is required. So that's kind of the first thing. And platforms are incentivized to collect as much data on you as they possibly can, right? They will take whatever you give them. And so you want to share as little as possible to still get the benefit of whatever it is you happen to be doing. The next thing is update your settings. Every platform that I use has settings on there where you can change how much they collect, what they do with your data, and how long they can store it for the most part. Now, I'm not going to get into every single platform because we'd be here all night, but at the end I'm going to share a QR code where you can find out more information on how to change these settings for each individual platform. And this is something that's important because the less data that platforms have on you, the less they know about you. And then the third piece is to use a privacy-first browser. One of the most efficient ways for companies to find out information about you are through things called cookies. Cookies, you've probably heard of them, but they're small text files that websites put on your hard drive when you're browsing the internet. They're good because it prevents you from having to log in every single time you refresh the page, and every time you go to a website, it remembers things about your preferences and what you're doing. So there are benefits to them, but depending on the type of cookie and the websites that you're going to, companies can actually build a really robust profile of what you do online and can track it back even sometimes to who you are and what it is you're wanting to do online. So use that. Also, from an ad blocker standpoint, some people may disagree with this. I find ads on the internet really annoying. Not so much because they're there, but because most of them are very poorly designed, which means that they slow down the website, they get in the way of what you're trying to do. And so I also use an ad blocker to prevent some of the tracking that happens from that perspective. So this is what you can do from a privacy standpoint. Now, why do platforms want to collect all this data to begin with? Most platforms are incented to collect as much data as they want or as they can from you. And the reason they want this data is because they want to manipulate you. Even good websites want to manipulate you. Now, it could be something silly or innocuous like getting you to buy a 12-pack of 1970s tube socks that you didn't really want, but you know, you got nostalgic for gym class and you decided you were going to buy those tube socks. It could be something like trying to convince you to have a different opinion about a political figure. It could be something like trying to convince you to give them money. And there are some dark corners of the web that are becoming more prolific that are tricking or manipulating people, especially teens and older people, to send them pictures of themselves or compromising information about themselves. And some really terrifying things are getting people to convince them to meet them in person offline. Now, there's legitimate uses for some of these types of things. Like I said before, it helps them tailor content. It makes your online experience better. It keeps you more informed about what you're doing. But we have to be aware of what's happening online. So what do we do about this? There's a few things that we can keep in mind. The first is to just be aware. This is happening to every single person in this room at some level if you ever log into an online platform. It is. I don't care what platform you're using. I don't care what website you're using. I don't care what commerce site you're using. They are attempting to gather data on you so that they can predict what will keep you there longer and what will entice you to either buy from them or to gather more data so that they can sell it to someone else. This is the reality. It's what's happening. So just being aware of this actually gives you more power. If anyone ever watched G.I. Joe cartoons in the 1980s, you know that knowing is half the battle, right? So just knowing about this will help you to be more aware and more intentional and more cognizant about what's happening to you online. The second piece is all those privacy things we just talked about, do them. The less data that platforms have on you, the less they are able to manipulate you. They will still try, but those ads that they show you, the information that they show you won't quite have the same effect because it's not as tailored as it could be to you as if they had more information on you. So what you want to do is to use those privacy settings as much as possible. So the third piece that I want to talk about, well, before we talk about the third piece, show of hands. How many people in the room use social media? Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, something, right? Okay, so keep your hands up, keep your hands up. So of the people who use it, after you've been online for 15 or 20 minutes or 3 hours looking at cat videos, do you feel anxious? Do you feel maybe worried, inadequate? Maybe like other people have things better than you? So one of the challenges, you can put your hands down now. One of the things with social media is that you only see the best for the most part. Well, you actually see one of two things. You usually see the best that people are posting. So on Instagram, nobody shows you the ugly picture, right? They show you the most amazing shot of the Eiffel Tower ever, right? Or there are people there who are trying to make you angry, who are trying to upset you. And so there's a lot of different aspects to social media that you have to be aware of. So with that as a backdrop, I want to share with you a conversation that I had recently. I say a conversation, a chat, that I had with a platform called Meta AI. So just so everyone knows, Meta is the company who owns Facebook. And Meta AI is their equivalent to ChatGPT. So it's an online AI platform. And so I went to Meta AI and I said, if independent thinking and avoidance of being manipulated is my primary goal, would I be better off avoiding sites like Facebook and other social media platforms? I don't like to read slides, but I'm going to read you what it responded. I have not changed a single word, not one word, of what it said. And it said, yes. Avoiding or limiting social media can be beneficial if your primary goal is independent thinking and avoiding manipulation. Here's why. Social media can create echo chambers. It can expose you to algorithmic manipulation. It can expose you to targeted advertising, and it can make you think that things are more prevalent and popular than they actually are. What are the benefits of limiting social media use? You can be manipulated less. You have increased independent thinking, improved critical thinking, enhanced mental health. What are some alternatives? Seek diverse sources of information. Use news aggregators, join online forums, cultivate online or offline interactions like we're having tonight. And most of all, use moderation. So I don't have a whole lot to add to this, right? Meta did a pretty good job of critiquing its own platforms. Now, I want you to know that I am not anti-Meta. I am not anti-Facebook. I am not anti-social media. I think social media is one of the best things we've ever invented in terms of our ability to stay connected. I can't imagine what the pandemic would have been like for some people who didn't have social media, right? So it is an amazing platform, and it is an amazing invention, but we have to be careful with it. And we have to follow Meta's own advice, which is to use it in moderation. And most importantly, get offline every once in a while. We're going to talk about something in a minute that is going to make getting offline even more important. But I think having these conversations offline, talking to your friends, talking to real people, people that you know are real people, is very important to safeguarding your ability to make critical thinking. Avoiding the algorithm was a term that I came up with on a walk today. I was trying to think about how to characterize this, but you want to avoid the algorithm. Every platform you're on, whether it's Amazon, Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever it happens to be, there's an algorithm there that is designed to capture your attention, to keep you engaged, and to get you to do whatever it is that platform wants you to do. The more you can avoid the algorithm, the better. I had a moment of frustration. It wasn't a moment, it was kind of an ongoing point of frustration earlier this year when I realized that news sites that I go to, real news sites, not like fringe websites, but mainstream media websites, they were showing me the same article over and over and over again. And it's not like it was the same topic, it was the same article. So I would read it on Monday as a headline, and then on Tuesday it would be on the sidebar. And then on Wednesday, it would be 3 stories down. And then on Thursday, it would be a few more down. But I kept seeing these stories over and over and over again. And what I had started longing for was a physical printed newspaper. Not literally a physical newspaper, but the experience of reading a newspaper. And the reason I wanted this was that in the olden days, when you had a physical newspaper, you would read it in the morning, you'd read the stories once, and then you'd throw it in the bin, and you were done. The newspaper wasn't hopping out of the trash bin every 15 minutes showing you the stories again, right? And so I wanted that experience, but all of the news sites, even the legitimate news sites, were constantly showing me the same story over and over and over and over again. So I went searching for a tool like I normally do, and I found a platform called InnoReader, which I'll show you in a minute, or at least show you the name in a minute. And what InnoReader does is you tell it the website you're interested in. It goes and pulls all the stories from those websites. It dedupes them, so you don't see the same one multiple times. And after you see it or read it, you say, I'm done with it, and it goes away. And so once a day, you can go to this platform. It has all the stuff that you're interested in from all these platforms. You read it once, and then you're done. And you're not getting bombarded by the same messages over and over again. So there's one other thing that I want to talk to you about tonight. And rather than kind of explain it to you myself, I thought I would let someone who's a bit more eloquent and that you might be a little more familiar with.
I am not Morgan Freeman, and what you see is not real. Well, at least in contemporary terms, it is not. What if I were to tell you that I am not even a human being? Would you believe me? What is your perception of reality? Is it the ability to capture, process, and make sense of the information our senses receive? If you can see, hear, taste, or smell something, does that make it real? Or is it simply the ability to feel? I would like to welcome you to the era of synthetic reality. Now, what do you see?
Now, just to be clear, that was not Morgan Freeman. All right? And what's even scarier was that that was made over 2 years ago. It's a little different than the AI now, because how I think they made that video was that there was a real person who actually said all of those things, and then they had a platform that overlaid Morgan Freeman's face onto that person's face. But the technology to do this has exponentially grown in the last 2 years. If you were at the talk that I did in August, I did a deep fake of myself that didn't fool people who know me, but people who didn't would have at least casually not realized that it wasn't me talking. So for those of you who don't know what a deep fake is some type of audio-visual representation of someone that's not real. So it's a video, it's an audio recording, sometimes an image of someone that's not real. They look very, very real. There are legitimate uses for this technology. You know, if you're a filmmaker and you're trying to recreate something that might have happened in 1920 and you don't have an actor from that time period, if you're trying to make Princess Leia look younger in the Star Wars sequel than she's not younger and you want to make it look like she was, there's legitimate things for this. If you're trying to make a commercial and you can't get the type of actor that you need or want, or you can't afford it, there are legitimate uses for some of this stuff. But these types of things are showing up more and more online. And it's making it very, very challenging to know what's real and what's not. And, you know, regulations have not kept up with this. They're not going to be able to keep up with it. The technology is moving much too fast. And even if they did, the regulations are only going to apply to the good guys, right? The good guys, the people who are honest, they're going to put the watermark on it that says this is AI. But the people who want to trick you, the people who want to convince you of something that's not real, they're not going to put a watermark on it. And it's going to be very challenging for you to see this. Edgar Allan Poe, over 100 years ago, said you should only believe half of what you read and nothing that you see. And that was pre all of this, right? And I don't want to be cynical, but what that says to me is that as long as people have been trying to convey messages, they've been trying to convince you of something, right? They've had an agenda. Everyone has an agenda. Everything you consume is created by someone who has an agenda. The agenda might be good. I have an agenda tonight. I want to educate everyone in this room about these technologies and how to protect yourselves. That's a good agenda, I think. But you shouldn't just believe me, right? You should leave this and go check some of the things that I'm saying. Research them for yourself. The only way to protect ourselves at all about these things is to use some critical thinking. Be intentional about what you see. Don't hyper-react to things that you see online. If you see something that's too extreme in any direction, question it, right? Is this real? If it seems to be too good to be true, is this real? It's very rare that I get upset at seeing a news report, even the bad stuff. And the reason is that the people who are telling you the news, good news and bad news, they have an interest in keeping you engaged. And so they want to make whatever they're telling you as engaging and interesting as it can be. And so whenever I hear something on the news that is interesting or concerning to me, I always go look at multiple sources. Because you need to cultivate an attitude that you're not going to necessarily believe the first thing you see. You want to get references from it. You want to talk to your friends. You want to talk to other trusted news sources. I don't have an easy answer for how to avoid the deepfake stuff, right? It's scary real. And it's scary cheap. The deepfake that I made of myself last month took me $11 in about 15 minutes. And it wasn't perfect, but it was pretty darn convincing. All right? So I don't have any good answers, but just be diligent. So one thing I did want to share with you is my own personal ecosystem. I'm not recommending any of these platforms, But the reason I'm showing them to you is I want to explain my rationale for which platforms that I use, because I think my rationale is sound regardless of which platforms I use. I am an Apple person. I use predominantly Apple devices. I do that for a few reasons. One, I like their products. I think they're well designed. I think they're easy to use. But at least so far, Apple's business model is not about selling my data. Their business model is to get as much of my money as they can, but it's not to sell my data, right? They want to sell me more devices. They want to sell me more of their own services. But so far, at least, and this could change, but so far they're not trying to sell my data. From a browser standpoint, because I'm an Apple person, I use Safari, but I also use an ad blocker that I mentioned earlier. There's also another browser and a search engine called DuckDuckGo, which the name's silly, but it's actually a good browser. The search engine works well. They don't track you. They're very privacy-oriented. So that's one that I use. From a social media standpoint, the only social media that I actively use is LinkedIn. Now, I don't have any delusions that LinkedIn is any better than the other platforms, right? They have an algorithm. They want to sell my attention and sell my data as much as any other platform does. But I know that, and so I give as little to them as I can. But the data that I put on LinkedIn is data that I want the world to know. Right? I use LinkedIn as a professional website where I want people to know that I'm doing speeches like I'm doing tonight. I want them to know what I've done in my career. And so that information I'm consciously putting out there. I don't have anything against the other platforms, the other social media platforms, but I only have so many hours in the day, and I choose them not to spend on those platforms. From an AI perspective, there are two platforms that I use predominantly. One is ChatGPT, which is from OpenAI, and the other one is a platform called Claude from a company called Anthropic. I turn off all of the privacy settings that says that they can train their models with my data, and I'm very cognizant about what data I give them. So I don't put my social security number in there. I don't put my personal address in there. I don't put my medical records in there. And so I'm very intentional about what I put in there and how I use those platforms. And then the last thing I'll mention was the news aggregator I mentioned earlier called InnoReader. There's dozens of these platforms. This one seemed to work well and worked well for me. It allows me to aggregate the stuff that I care about watching or reading online. I do want to talk about Google for a second. A few years ago, I had a realization that my entire online life was going through Google. I used Google for Gmail. I used it for web browsing. I used it for searching. I used it for maps. I used it for documents. I used it for everything. And that concerned me from a couple of perspectives. One was, what if they got mad at me? What if they decided, we don't like Jason, we're going to lock down his account? Everything I had would have been gone, right? And they don't really have a way to challenge those things a lot of times. So I started on this experiment where I wanted to see how far away from Google I could get, at least in terms of from a consumer platform standpoint. And so I systematically started using other platforms. The last holdout was Maps, because their maps are actually really good. But Apple Maps have actually caught up and are actually, I think, as good or comparable at least. And so today, I don't really use any Google platforms. Now, I don't have anything against Google per se, but my problem with them is that their business model is about selling my data. Right? They want to monetize my information. Now, I still use Google. There are organizations and individuals that I work with, some of them in this room right now, who use Google as their predominant platform. And so they're obviously not going to change just because I prefer some other platform. And so what I do is I have a Chrome browser that I only use when I'm accessing Google platforms. Anything else that I do from Safari or DuckDuckGo. And this allows me to kind of separate those things out. Again, I don't think Google is an evil corporation. I don't think that they're doing anything that we don't know about. I think they're selling everyone's data and monetizing it. But I choose to not participate in that as much as I can. And so that's why I sort of avoid Google. All right, so we've had a lot of doom and gloom tonight. So I wanted to leave you with something a little more positive. Now, this is an AI-generated image. I was actually pretty happy with how this turned out. It's not what I had in mind, but when I asked ChatGPT to generate it, this is what it came up with. And I wanted it to combine electricity, bicycles, and ice into one image. And the reason I wanted to do that is I want to talk to you about those three things. Electricity, when it was first discovered and started being used, people were terrified of it. They were terrified of it because they thought it was going to create fires. They thought they were going to get electrocuted. They thought that society would become too dependent on electrical devices. Sound familiar? And so it was something that created a lot of controversy over electricity. The gas companies didn't want it because they wanted to keep gas lights in the streets, and it was a big thing. Bicycles, when they were first introduced, created a lot of controversy because people were worried about bicycle face. How many of you ever heard of bicycle face? This was a medically recognized condition. I swear to you, it was a medically recognized condition, and it was predominantly, women were predominantly cautioned against it. And the whole premise was that you have this look on your face when you're riding a bicycle really hard, right? You grimace and you get all red-faced and you get sweaty, and they were warning people that riding a bicycle would permanently disfigure them and cause their face to have this bicycle face. Swear to you this is true. It was predominantly targeted towards women. Why? Because when the bicycle first became popular, women and the working class were not particularly mobile. The introduction of the bicycle allowed them to be more mobile. It gave them more freedoms. And there was very serious concern that the bicycle was going to create societal upheaval because it was giving those individuals in those classes a new way of venturing out into the world. And then ice. In, I think it was 1809, if I have the date right, there was a ship sailed to Martinique in the Caribbean. It came from somewhere in the North Atlantic. And it was carrying 130 tons of ice on board. And the people who sailed down there thought they were going to make their fortune because ice doesn't exist in Martinique in 1809. So they loaded up this ship from somewhere in the North Atlantic. They sailed down to Martinique, and they were going to make their fortune. When they got there, nobody knew what the heck to do with it. The people had never seen ice. They thought it was kind of interesting, like this cold, cool, cold thing, but they didn't know what to do with it. So nobody wanted it, and it all melted. Right? So they didn't make their fortune. So I bring all this up to say that people in general are afraid of new technologies. We always have been, we probably always will be. And the reason is that they're unknowns. We don't know what's going to happen with them. We don't know what they're going to cause. And when you look at all the stuff we talked about tonight, there's a lot to be worried about. There's a lot to be cautious about. But I think there's a lot to be optimistic about as well. Because somehow we've always figured out how to balance the good and the bad of technologies. And I think with a little bit of due diligence, a little bit of creativity, a little bit of optimism, we can use the technologies that we're inventing to serve us and not the other way around.